Hello and welcome. I'm Dr. Amy Dunham Strand, Director of the Jane Hibbert Idema Women's and Gender Studies Center here at Aquinas and also Interim Chair of the English Department. We're really excited to have Amanda Stern here with us and to have you here with us. This event brings together two really wonderful Aquinas programming initiatives, the Contemporary Writers Series and the Women's and Gender Studies Center. Thanks to some generous alumni, Dr. Tony Foster and poet Linda Nemec Foster, who unfortunately aren't able to be here tonight. But thanks to them, the Contemporary Writers Series engages West Michigan with some of the world's most acclaimed writers and poets. And thanks to a generous endowment by Twink Fry and James E. McKay, the Jane Hibbert Idema Women's and Gender Studies Center serves as a community resource for women's and gender issues and to empower community members to advocate for social justice. So please check our respective websites, the Contemporary Writers Series and the Jane Hibbert Idema Women's and Gender Studies Center, for past and future events like this one. And certainly next year's lineup for the Contemporary Writers Series promises to be fantastic. Just a couple of housekeeping reminders before we get going. Please turn off your cell phones and devices and stay off your cell phones and devices, students. Also, please no video recording or flash photography. This will be recorded, is being recorded, and you'll be able to find it on the Aquinas YouTube channel in about a week. They tend to get posted in about a week. So you can find it there and share it with people at that point. Also, there will be a chance for everyone to ask questions at the end of the reading, so please be ready to engage in conversation with our guest. Please go up to the mics at the front of the room and line up, and then we can ask our questions that way. And then finally, you are invited to stay after the reading to talk to others, grab a cup of coffee and a cookie, and get your book signed just out here in the atrium area. So Amanda, thank you so much for being here, and I now invite our student, senior English major, Jenna Hoenke, to give Amanda's introduction.
Hello everyone, my name is Jenna Hoenke and I'm a senior English major here at Aquinas. Before I introduce our guest, I would like to read a land acknowledgement by the Marywood Dominican Sisters of Grand Rapids, the founders of Aquinas College, who foster a commitment to lifelong learning dedicated to the pursuit of truth and the common good. We acknowledge this Aquinas campus and Marywood campus as a gift of the Great Spirit's creation and the ancestral home of the Anishinaabe, the Ottawa, Ojibwe, and Potawatomi tribes of the Three Fires Confederacy. Land acres now known as Michigan were taken from indigenous peoples through treaty, broken promises, and forced removal. We strive to grow in awareness of our debt to Native peoples. Thank you, Dominican Sisters, for allowing us to share this powerful acknowledgement today. Now to introduce our guest author. Amanda Stern is the author of 13 books, including The Long Haul, Little Panic, Dispatches from an Anxious Life, and 11 books for kids written under pseudonyms, including You Are So Not Invited to My Bat Mitzvah, which Adam Sandler turned into a Netflix movie. She writes the Psychology and Mental Health newsletter, How to Live, which goes out to 18,000 subscribers. The newsletter delves into the unseen forces shaping our thoughts and actions by blending psychology, philosophy, art, and personal experience, and distilling complex ideas into compelling narratives to confront hard questions. She lives in Fort Greene, Brooklyn, with her dog Busy. They are both working on novels. Please help me welcome author Amanda Stern.
Thank you both so much. Thank you all so much for coming. Yes, I am standing on a second stage because I am that short. This is my first time in Michigan ever. Yeah, and I've met the most wonderful people. Like, you guys are amazing. I want to thank Linda and Tony Foster for founding the Contemporary Writers Program and all the incredible students and people I met earlier today. Everyone has made me feel so incredibly welcome, and I thank you so much. Over a year ago, Shelley Jeffries, who I'm really sad is not here tonight, reached out, alerting me to this year's mental health theme and asked if I might give 2 talks, one on the writing craft and one on panic. And since I'm a sucker for a night of lighthearted, laid-back topics, I jumped at the opportunity. When I was a kid, I had a block against learning how to tell time. My classmates understood time as a concept when, to me, it was concrete. Time is when you have to leave your mother. And the adults around me grew concerned. My inability to tell time could only mean one thing. I had learning challenges. It would take 25 years before I learned the truth. What they had labeled a cognitive deficit was actually the manifestation of an undiagnosed panic disorder. That gap between what I felt and what it looked like to others is why I became a writer. And it's why I'm standing here tonight. Several years ago, I published a memoir called Little Panic: Dispatches from an Anxious Life about my experience growing up in Greenwich Village with a panic disorder that went undiagnosed until I was 25. And tonight I'll share those experiences, talk about how it shaped my identity as a young adult, and read some excerpts from my memoir to best illustrate what I was aiming to do. Now, panic attacks trigger a combination of physical, mental, and emotional responses that feel like your immediate well-being, sense of security and stability, and existence itself are in danger. The experience is invisible, and often it's inarticulable. And as someone whose experiences have largely been mediated by anxiety and panic, I've spent more than half of my life working to free myself so I can exist in the same reality with those around me. Well, this has made my life more exhausting, frustrating, and isolating as a writer. It's offered me something unique. And that's my ability to write from inside the body, where emotion lives, to impart the haptic, nerve-lit sensations the character, in this case, me, is feeling on the page. My goal with Little Panic was to write an autobiography of an emotion from the point of view of a child, me, again, being the child, to offer not the intellectual, but the inarticulable, somatic experience of childhood panic to the reader so that they too could understand that specific mental anguish on the same visceral plane that it occurs. Now, I chose this literary device because it's congruent with my belief that it's our moral responsibility as human beings to share with one another what our experience of being human feels like. Because without sharing that information, we're left to wonder whether we're doing life wrong, and we walk around with the secret worry that we're defective and broken and wrong. This was a specific craft challenge, not just because it was technically difficult, but because it was emotionally harrowing. To write a somatic memoir, I had to capture the contours and textures of my earliest panic attacks. And this meant lying on my couch, shutting my eyes, and calling up the panic into my body so I could write it one sensation at a time. This afternoon I spoke about how to write complex emotion, but tonight, in honor of this year's mental health theme, I'm going to tell you about how my parents, schools, doctors, and every adult in my life overlooked my anxiety and panic while fixating on my learning differences. But my story isn't just about suffering. It's about the stunning discovery that the very things I was taught to hide, my sensitivity, my particular way of processing the world, my all-encompassing emotions, would eventually become not just my greatest personal strengths, but a centerpiece of my career. Before I share my story, I want to explain the difference between typical anxiety and atypical anxiety. Typical anxiety is your stable, grounded friend. It visits briefly in response to actual threats or challenges, like speaking in front of an audience or going on a first date, starting a new job. It feels uncomfortable, but it passes. I'd be remiss not to mention the perilous political moment we're living through, which is giving rise to extraordinary stress. Yet our collective anxiety is a rational response to real threats. While external events amplify our anxiety, clinical anxiety disorders operate on a totally different level. They can exist independently of external circumstances and often involve disproportionate reactions to even minor triggers. Atypical anxiety is that toxic person in your life you cannot shake, no matter what. It's relentless, clingy, and interferes with your entire existence. It creates danger where none exists. It transforms ordinary bumps in the road into life or death scenarios. It lies. I've had toxic person anxiety my entire life. My earliest memory is having a panic attack. As a child, I knew that I felt things in ways that others didn't, because out of all of my siblings and friends, I was the only one who was afraid to separate from my mother, because to me, separation meant death. Every time I left my mom, I was convinced I'd never see her again. I was certain she would die, disappear, or simply forget she had children and move to Europe without telling us. I was afraid of being kidnapped. I was afraid she'd be kidnapped. I was happiest when I was with her, because then she was never alone. And when she was alone, I worried she didn't know how to protect herself from harm. This short excerpt gives a taste of how my anxiety felt when I was trying to learn. I'm about 6 in this section. My best friend Melissa is trying to help me tell time. Time sticks numbers on the world and marks spaces I can't see. My teacher says the hands do this, and clocks are how we know when to come and go, but I am not a clock, and I always know when I have to leave my mom. Our classmates are running clockwise on the reading rug, calling out minutes and hours from the center of the room. Their clapped vibrations catch in the middle of my body. Their carefree jumps pass from the floor into my feet and knees. Once I understand what they do, we can join the game. But until then, I'm keeping Melissa stuck. My lungs feel tight. Is it AM or PM? Melissa thinks she's helping, but she's not. I look at the board where a chalk sun rises over AM and a moon sinks down to PM. It's AM, I say. There's too much going on around me. I'm in 19 different places at once. No, it's PM. But the sun is out, I say, pointing. At 12, things turn PM, she explains. Then what turns everything AM? 12, she says. There are 2 12s. One turns everything PM and the other turns everything AM. I look back at the clock. Melissa steps in and out of her clogs. Where's the other 12? I ask. The one 12 is 2 12s, she says. All numbers happen twice. How can one number mean 2 things? Does everything mean 2 things? When Allegra writes on the calendar like class picnic or field trip, they become true. Before she wrote them, they didn't exist. Before I was born, I didn't exist either. And after I die, I won't exist again. What else of the world can't I see? The edges of the room smudge with black fog, and a slow suction pulls me away from Melissa, from all of them. Soon, my classmates will be far ahead of me. I'll watch them move without me to the grade above and the grade after that, and they'll go to college and get married and have babies and families and jobs and houses, and I'll be right here, still trying to tell time, still trying to understand the secret second thing, stuck and alone and 6 forever. Maybe like the number 12, there are 2 worlds. They're in one together, while I'm in mine alone. Everyone wants me to learn how to read time, but no one understands that I don't want more ways that say goodbye. I refuse to sleep at friends' houses, and I never let anyone sleep at mine. They might distract me from keeping track of my mom's whereabouts. And at night, I'd watch out my window to make sure my mother wasn't running away. Every other weekend, we were sent to my dad's house uptown, and those weekends always tormented me most. Everyone tried to convince me that a weekend wasn't long, but that wasn't true for me. Even as a child, I was unconsciously creating my own measures of time, charting how my anxiety changed colors and sensations as the days and weeks progressed. While other children lived in the known world of clocks and calendars, my time-telling system was called countdowns. I felt my fears not just inside my body, but with my body. I don't think I took a full breath until I was 25 years old. Deep down, I was convinced that something was horribly wrong with me, that I had some defect that no one else had. My brokenness was invisible, and therefore it couldn't be fixed. And this shamed me, and I worked overtime to keep myself from accidentally exposing my horrifying truth to the outside world. The closer it got to leaving my mom, the worse I felt. I had 24-hour stage fright, and there was no stage I had to be on. I felt as though I was being dragged by my ankles toward black, tarry quicksand that wanted to sink me dead. I'll read another short passage from the countdown section. I'm around 7 here. And 7 there? Maybe? Countdowns are how my body tells time. Everyone else lives in a clock and calendar world, but my clocks and calendars are countdowns that start light and safe like ocean bubbles and end dark and dangerous like animal extinction. Countdowns come in stages that change color and sensation as they move from deep to shallow. They tell me in advance when I'm leaving my mom. Before a weekend with my dad, they look like this: Monday. When I wake up and remember that it's Monday, 5 entire days until I have to go to my dad's, the doom lifts and my relief grows. On Monday, Friday is far enough away. I'm in deep countdown, which is pale yellow and pulses in the distance. During the day, the world is one glob of noise and action. The day's sun makes me feel like we're all connected, but daylight makes a promise that night doesn't keep. The darker it gets, the closer it is to bedtime, and bedtime is when I have to leave my mom by herself in the world. Dinner moves me one space ahead, cleanup is 2, bath is 3, and on it goes until it's time for sleep where I may never wake up. Tuesday. I wake up and feel relieved that I didn't die. Another minute to feel the world, which tells me I'm still in deep countdown. The pulse is there, but now the dull tugging is a bit closer. Unlike yesterday, if today someone says the word Friday or weekend, if I hear a number that matches the date I'm leaving, or I smell something like grilled cheese, which I eat only at my dad's, I feel a wave of middle countdown. Wednesday, I wake up into middle countdown, which doesn't have color. Middle countdown is a vibration. Once I'm in middle countdown, I feel mad at myself that I didn't appreciate the safe feelings of Monday and Tuesday enough, that I didn't prepare myself. Middle countdown is a tunnel I enter. Sometimes the tunnel lasts only a flight of stairs or the entire day, crawling towards shallow countdown, which is the most dangerous. After school, everyone is already talking about Friday like they can't wait. That's when the sky lowers. A heavy day cups us close, catching the future, dragging it closer. Thursday. When I wake up into shallow countdown, my limbs feel heavy and hard to lift. I can smell last night on my pillow, but I'm not in last night anymore. Shallow countdowns can't be ignored. You don't accidentally walk into it or get zapped by its sudden flash. Shallow countdown paints over the stars and city lights. Shallow countdown is feeling the settings that hold your teeth in place, forgetting the names for familiar things like bed, dog, and window. Shallow countdown is knowing you're about to die. Every bite of school lunch is flavored with it. A new word, the last song in the school play, the smell of cooked mozzarella on after-school pizza, my mother's closed eyes when she laughs, my siblings' huddled whispers, the sun warming the cobbles on Worcester Street, the sound of skin sticking to a summer banister. When the sun starts to set, my dread grows. Night pulls people apart. Friday, the worst day of the week. I wake up and know what today is about. My skin feels tight around my bones. Balloon air takes up all the room inside me, making it hard to swallow, skimming just the top of each breath. There is no gap between times of fear. Fear is all there is. I feel the cracks and shadow places between the bones of the world, which is stripped of rules I can depend on. On those Fridays before my dad arrives, I cry, cling to my mother, press myself into the banister. I hide in my closet, but never for too long because it's too far from my mother. My temples tense with sharp headaches, my stomach hardens into a stale-fisted chestnut. How come no one except me understands that my heart must be near my mother's heart in order for us both to survive? When I'm gone, my mom might forget I exist, wander across the world, and never send her new address. She might accidentally burn down the house or open the door to a killer who just robbed a bank. Anything can happen when I'm not there. And then countdowns change into the actual events. Weekends I never make it through. If my mom is murdered, will my dad know how to care for me, or will he make fun of me all the time, like always? Last summer, the son of Sam killed people, and the city had a blackout. What if the son of Sam comes back? The world moves too fast, and I am too slow dodging out of the way. I keep getting crushed by life's revolving doors. No one tries to save me because it's all invisible to them. Why can't anyone else see how hard the world is pressing against me? Almost as soon as I arrived wherever I was sent, I'd call home crying, and my mom would race to bring me home. If she was going to rescue me from every hard situation, why did she send me in the first place? Despite always saving me, my worries were met with fierce denials. You don't need to worry about that. Nothing bad is going to happen to me, to anyone. No one's going to kidnap you. No one's going to die. But that wasn't true, and I knew it. When I was 9, my parents decided to send me away to sleepaway camp for 2 entire months. A strange decision for a child who couldn't make it through one weekend at her father's. A month before I left, a 6-year-old boy named Eitan Pates went missing in my neighborhood. Nope, that's not him. Nope. There he is. This validated everything I'd been afraid of. True, it wasn't me who'd been kidnapped, but it confirmed my core belief. The world could not be trusted. It proved wrong all the adults who told me nothing bad happens to kids. I begged my mom not to send me away. I knew, absolutely, with every atomic cell in my body, that if I left home, people I loved would die. My mother promised no one would. I didn't believe her, but I had no choice. I went to camp. While I was gone, my beloved grandfather, Baba, died. And when I returned and asked to see my best friend, Melissa, I learned that my grandfather hadn't been the only one to die. Melissa had also died of a brain tumor, which I'd originally been told was a bad headache that wouldn't last. They told me nothing bad would happen if I left my mom, but I left my mom and people I loved died. I knew then that I was a murderer, and I vowed never to leave home again. I'd let down my guard about a month into camp when I stopped worrying. This had been a mistake. I understood that I'd been right all along. Worrying keeps people alive. My trust in the world became even more tenuous. My anxiety worsened and seeped into every layer of my life. It was so acute, it interfered with my ability to take tests, ask questions in class, or listen. And when I started getting grades, they were bad, and the alarms were raised. Could I see the board, hear the teacher? Was I having difficulty with reading and comprehension? Suddenly, everyone wanted to know what was wrong with me, but oddly, they weren't looking in the right place. No one asked me how I felt or what I felt. No one asked me what happened when I was put on the spot in class. No one asked me if I was afraid to be wrong in front of other people. I was gingerly tiptoeing through my internal world, trying not to set off new anxiety traps that would capture and kill me, while the adults were consulting entirely different maps. They just wanted to know what part of my brain needed to be fixed. But what felt broken and wrong to me wasn't in my brain. It was my emotions, and I didn't know how to point to something invisible inside my body. Soon, all I did was go to doctors. My eyes and ears were checked. I hopped across rooms on one foot then the other. They gave me an IQ test. I answered questions about capitals and states, but my worries always got the best of me, and the timer made me clam up. I had hoped that the testing might identify what was wrong with my emotions, why I could never leave my mom. But they kept asking me school questions and not feeling questions. And this made me worry that they were testing me for the wrong thing or mistaking me for a different kid who had brain problems and not feeling problems. When I asked why they were testing me, they told me not to worry about it. When I made it through the first IQ test, I thought that would be that. But soon I found myself in a different room with a different doctor being asked the exact same questions. And that's when a sweeping sickness passed through me. I was dumb. That's why they were testing me, and they were too embarrassed to tell me. When no one would tell me the result of the tests, the message was that I couldn't handle my own truth, which meant the truth was too hard to handle. And I knew my fears were true. I was dumb. I felt sorry for my parents and sorry for myself. They were probably so ashamed of me, and that's why they didn't talk to me about all the testing. I began to believe the story about myself I imagined the adults were telling, that I was defective. The IQ test led me to believe that there was a right way to be a human and that I was doing it wrong. Feeling dumb became the centerpiece of my entire life, and my anxiety around being exposed was fierce. I avoided being around people who might see the cracks in my brain. Everything around me felt out of reach. I didn't learn in the same styles teachers taught. I was incompatible with the conventional ways of things, and to me and to the adults around me, that was a deficit, never a strength. But underneath my stupidity was this other thing, this constant dread and fear which no one seemed to see. I worried that this other thing was worse than dumb, something so rare it hadn't been discovered yet, or so shameful no one wanted to admit I had it. Nope. IQ test. IQ test and a Rorschach. At every turn, I was treated as someone who couldn't understand what smart people could. I leaned into my creativity, which is where I felt most capable. And by the time I was a senior in high school, my anxiety had been ignored and dismissed for my entire childhood. And I began to think of myself as someone who was not just defective and inadequate, but inessential. The adults in my life never taught me how to handle or manage my emotions. Instead, they ignored them and focused on external factors like why I did badly in school. From them, I learned that the way a person should manage their emotions is to avoid or ignore them. And I'd been doing that my entire life, but as I got older, it got harder to avoid socializing. And the only way I could manage was to perform, to play act at being someone unafraid and tough. I began hanging out with the wrong people and started self-medicating with drugs. I did have a couple of positive outlets, though, writing and theater. I'd been writing since I was young, and when I was 14, I was accepted into a theater company for kids. We wrote plays and performed them in a church basement. I was conditioned to be a compliant people pleaser, while my brother got to be angry out loud, which I felt was wildly unfair. But then I realized I could channel my anger into plays and short stories about furious boys, and writing became a way for me to express my hidden feelings, and reading taught me how to write, and the two combined seemed to regulate my nervous system. The connection between what I felt and shaping the feelings on the page was the only resource I had for trying to make sense of my emotional world. My senior year, I co-wrote a play that was produced off Broadway, and I performed in it, and this is how I discovered I had debilitating stage fright. I threw up before every single show, couldn't let anyone touch me or look at me, and I couldn't go to school for 3 days leading up to the premiere. But once I was on stage and the lights came on and I said my first few lines and I didn't die, I felt amazing, and I wanted more of that. That's the play we wrote. The testing stopped when I got to college, but my worries by then had grown out of control, and my ability to hide what I'd later learn were panic attacks became stronger. The belief that I was stupid had long cemented itself into place, and it organized itself around my anxiety, shaping my life and driving every choice I made. And all those years of testing, of being told I had some unspecified learning challenge, that I needed help to understand what others seemed to understand so easily, shaped my view of myself. What went overlooked entirely was the effort to understand who and how I was, and not being seen felt damaging. I know that many of you who are in college relate to this feeling, the pressure to perform, to measure up, to fit an academic mold that wasn't designed with all minds in mind, the sense that you're not seen. And the college years can intensify these pressures as you navigate not just academics, but your emerging identities and relationships. And the struggle between who you are and who you think you're supposed to be can create the perfect conditions for anxiety to flourish. If you're a writer struggling with anxiety during your college years, use your uncertainty as material. College is inherently unstable. You're between identities, between childhood and adulthood, and rather than trying to project false confidence in your writing, document the questions and tensions you're navigating. Your most powerful work often emerges from this liminal space. And to the perfectionists out there, I have a secret. That obsessive need to perfect your work before showing it to anyone is often anxiety in disguise. Growth happens because something is unfinished, not because it's finished. If you wait until everything is right, you risk not getting the feedback that will help you evolve. While I was coming of age, difference was stigmatized, not embraced. I wasn't seen as creative, original, or innovative. Thinking outside the box, a much heralded skill, was seen as like totally weird for a kid in the 80s. Because my anxiety went untreated and misunderstood for so long, it grew with me. And when I turned 20, my anxiety and panic seemed to accelerate, shrinking my world and making my life much smaller. Things like going to a bar, having a friend over, talking on the phone, going to a party made me panic. And by the time I turned 25, my panic had spiraled so far out of control, I couldn't leave my house or open my windows without feeling like I was dying. I was 25 years old and I wanted a big life. I wanted to write and perform and make things and be on stage, but I knew I'd never be able to achieve any of that. I mean, I couldn't even leave my apartment. The suffering soon became too unbearable for me to live with, and I decided that I needed to end my life. Despite not wanting to die at all, but I truly could see no other alternative. So I called my mom to tell her. But first, I needed her to tell me the truth. Was I crazy? Was that what was wrong with me? She denied it and then sent a cab to pick me up. This meant I had to leave my house for the first time in 3 weeks, which I did. In that cab, and finally outside, I had an epiphany. Perhaps it wasn't death I was afraid of, but life. After all, I avoided all the things and places that activated my overwhelming dread, and this prevented me from truly living the life I wanted, to truly take part in the world, to perform or read aloud in public. I'd have to stop avoiding events that made me anxious and go toward them. And that made me wonder, what if my fear wasn't about the events at all, but about the intolerable feeling of fear the events activated? In other words, what if my real fear wasn't death or extinction, but the distressing feeling of fear itself? And if that was the case, then avoidance was hurting, not helping me. What I needed to do was go toward the fear and get used to the feelings. That would be easier, I thought, than continuing to avoid feeling the fear at all. Avoidance, after all, only seemed to aggravate my panic. So I made a decision in the back of that cab that since avoiding my fears felt scarier, made the world feel scarier, I would spend the rest of my life walking toward every fear I had. The next morning, in under 10 minutes, my mother's therapist diagnosed me with a severe panic disorder. He told me that when anxiety goes untreated, it branches out into other disorders, and that I not only had severe panic disorder, I also had clinical depression, social anxiety, performance anxiety, and agoraphobia. Hearing these words and feeling the internal click, that matching rightness to my impossible, invisible, disordered emotions felt out of body in a good way. I felt suddenly like a valid human being. I hadn't even realized that my feelings were categorizable as symptoms. Panic disorder, of course. He put me on medication, and I found a therapist, and I slowly began to feel better. I still take medication. I might always take it, because life is too hard for me without it, and I'd rather be an active part of this world than a passive observer. Once I began feeling better, I went about the incredibly challenging work of facing my fears. I wanted that big life, to perform, to make people laugh, to write, to create theater, but I had profound stage fright and a constant voice telling me I wasn't good enough, that I was too dumb. I got a job working at Broadway Video, which produces Saturday Night Live, doing data entry. And I befriended the people around me, many in other departments, including a producer who was developing a new comedy show. He eventually brought me in as a team member and ultimately hired me to co-host the show with Marc Maron. This was terrifying, but I had made myself a promise, and I knew that if I wanted a big life, I had to walk through my terror to get to it. So I accepted the job and powered through my debilitating stage fright that always let up once I said my lines and heard people laugh. The show led to other terrifying opportunities in television that I took, but I discovered that the comedy world, where everyone had to be on all the time, kept me in a state of chronic stress. And when my manager wanted to create a TV show for me, I felt that deep dread that signals moving away from your true self. So I quit and decided to face the next terrifying goal, writing a novel. I was 27 years old when I began, and I wrote feverishly, furiously, and did not want to stop writing. I wrote through the nights, cleaning my brother's yoga school for money during the day, and I finished a draft of my novel in 9 months, something I've never, ever done again. The book was about a codependent, her obsession with her free therapist, and an alcoholic boyfriend she loves and loathes in equal measure. Yes, it was a thinly veiled autobiography. I read a ton of Dennis Johnson at the time, listened to desperately sad music, trying to capture the specific ennui of the 90s. And writing my first novel felt like I was braiding a rope made of my secrets, readying to toss it out into the world for others to see, hoping they might grab hold of it and say, "Me too." The thought that something I wrote might make others feel less alone made me feel less alone. That's the book. When the novel was published, I created a reading series called Happy Ending, where authors took public risk on stage, and the series became unexpectedly very successful, and I ran it for 15 years. But something I still hadn't done was talk publicly about my panic disorder. I was still hiding it, fearing its reveal telegraphed to others that something was still deeply wrong with me. I finally ended the series to devote myself to my own writing, and I was trying to write my next novel, which wasn't going well, and so I cheated on it and began writing what became Little Panic. I didn't show it to anyone, but when I started to mention to others that I was writing about anxiety, I was blown away by how many people took me aside to confide that they too suffered. This changed everything for me. I had no idea that other people felt like I did, and knowing it made me less afraid to share my story, which is why I am now sharing it with you. I spent 4.5 years writing Little Panic, incorporating my childhood IQ tests and evaluations, weaving them throughout the narrative to create a record of what it felt like to hide your truest self and to be tested and found wanting. I learned something really valuable about writing emotion during Little Panic, and it's that anxiety has its own architecture. When structuring my childhood fears around the days of the week in the countdown section you heard, I created a container strong enough to hold overwhelming feelings without diluting their intensity. The progression from deep countdown to shallow countdown mirrored how anxiety builds, methodical and predictable, yet still devastating when it arrives. I learned to trust that the more specific and physical I made the sensations, the balloon air, the stale-fisted chestnut of my stomach, the more universal they became. Maintaining my childhood voice required dropping into my body to call up the somatic sensations I felt and remain true to how my younger self experienced the world, resisting the urge to inject adult understanding or perspective. The challenge came from showing how a 7-year-old creates systems to navigate what adults couldn't or wouldn't acknowledge. And these techniques became foundational for my writing practice. I found I could use similar structural approaches in all of my work, creating frameworks that gave readers access to chaotic emotional experiences without losing them in the chaos. The relationship between anxiety and creativity is complex and deeply personal. For me, anxiety hasn't fueled my creativity. That's a dangerous myth. Rather, my creativity has survived despite my anxiety, and in some ways transformed because of it. Anxiety gives you the heightened sensitivity to the world. You notice details that other people miss. You anticipate patterns and possibilities. You're acutely aware of emotional undercurrents. And these qualities can be powerful tools for a writer when you learn how to channel them. What I've found is that anxiety creates a unique relationship with language. When you spend your life searching for words to describe seemingly inarticulable feelings, you develop a precision with language that becomes a craft strength. You become fluent in translating the invisible. However, anxiety also creates barriers to creativity, the perfectionism, the self-doubt, the fear of exposure. The trick isn't using anxiety to create, but learning to create alongside it. Ultimately, my most valuable creative work hasn't come from my anxiety, but from my attempt to make sense of it. The effort to excavate and articulate what feels ineffable has become the foundation of my artistic practice. What makes anxiety debilitating in life, its intensity, its irrationality, its overwhelming physicality, becomes transformative when properly contained on the page. I am still scared. I still suffer from fear that I'm not smart enough or good enough. But something I've learned from being so open about my mental health struggles is how few people are open. Watching people be dishonest about their fears only compels me to be more honest, to report the truth, that everyone is afraid. Everyone doubts themselves, fears rejection, failure, and believes what they're told about how to be a person in the world. And the best piece of advice I can give you as human beings and as writers and artists is to be afraid and do it anyway. Fear will follow you. Go anyway. I learned late in life that the more I tried to be like everyone around me, the farther from my true weird self I got. Pay attention to the questions you ask of the world and of yourself, to the types of things you're drawn to, because your response to those things, how you answer them, integrate, understand, and express yourself is your intelligence. And if you're an artist, those are often your themes. And the singularity in which you execute your art, that's your style. I've been told my entire life that my feelings and emotions were wrong, but I've come to learn that our emotions are a strength, even if they're painful and uncomfortable, especially when they're painful and uncomfortable. Because people with anxiety cannot tolerate living with the uncertainty of dread and unease, we're often more compelled than most to learn how to feel better, to make our feelings more bearable. If there's one essential thing that I want you to take away from this talk, it's this: avoiding what you're afraid of makes your life harder and can trap you in a waiting room that becomes your life. I'm going to skip ahead because this is too long. I grew up believing there was a right way to be a person and that I was doing it wrong. I was raised to believe that there are those who are normal and those who are abnormal, but there is no such thing as normal. Normalcy is a myth, and those who buy into its importance are missing out on being amazing. We are all different. We're each a language that must be learned, but we must learn ourselves first. What began as a private battle to reclaim my voice from anxiety has shown me something larger at work: the systematic silencing of voices that don't conform to dominate narratives and the revolutionary powers that emerge when we refuse that silence. The art that matters isn't born from comfort, it erupts from the wounds we're told to hide, the questions we're told not to ask, and the rage we're told is unbecoming. Every time someone tells you to write what you know, remember this: what you know that no one else does is your exact texture of your fear, your shame, your particular madness. That's why you write. You do it entirely alone, in solitude, and when you're done, the only thing left is to toss those flares into the world, hoping that they might help others find their way home. I'm going to wrap up with a final excerpt from Little Panic. Are we way past time? Hold, please. From birth to death, we are measured and weighed, plotted on a line of percentile curves and compared against an invisible normal. We are appraised on our ability to answer questions whose responses are either right or wrong, which telegraphs to us that we are either right or wrong. We are tested, examined, assessed, and evaluated, and the numerical results become who we are. But it's in the chasm between you and that invisible normal where anxiety grows, telling you there's been an error and that error is you. This is where I spent my life, wasting my cleanest fuel on a misguided channel crossing away from who I was and toward some interpretation of who I was supposed to be. The message to people who learn differently, who are poor test takers, or who display any physical, emotional, or intellectual variance is that we're not who we should be, and who we are isn't right. My fear and my conviction were the same, that I was the flaw in the universe, the wrongly circled letter in our multiple choice world. This terrible truth binds us all. Fear that there's a single, unattainable, correct way to be human. We rely on measures that disregard human characteristics such as empathy and emotion to tell us who we are. Unconsciously, we consider these results our worth, and we shrink or expand our self-image to fit inside these notions. But we are not our results, just as we are not who other people imagine us to be. And yet we are placed and displaced according to these returns. We spend our lives unwittingly applying this system of measurement ourselves, raising our children on it, and teaching them to pass it down. I dragged my youthful beliefs into adulthood, granting myself the grand fears of my childhood by building a type of altar to my concerns and making good on old worries. When I was finally diagnosed at age 25, I had to accept a different truth and learn a new way to be me. In the end, so many of the things I feared would happen, happened. People died, they disappeared, we lost our house. It's all come true. And here I am now, living inside the very future I feared, imagining it will kill me. Yet I'm okay, I'm alive. While I didn't get the things I assumed I'd have, I did get the one thing I'd been seeking since I was little, a name for my suffering. And something else, the will to go toward my fears, to feel my awful feelings and live with discomfort and uncertainty in a life that often feels too hard for me. I grew up believing the story of myself the adults around me told and looked outside for clues to tell me who I am. As an adult and as a writer, I learned that by making the invisible visible and encouraging others to be true and vulnerable, we grow into the story of ourselves that we get to tell, and not the story we're afraid might be true. Thank you. Thank you. I gotta say, it's very, very hard to time a talk. Like, you're in the middle of it and you're like, I don't know. Has it been an hour? I am gonna take questions. Do you wanna do it? Let's do it.
Yeah, we're gonna move to a Q&A. If you have a question, please come up to these two microphones in the front.
And I know some of you may be shy. That's okay. You just heard this. I have anxiety. I'm up here. You can do it. You can. Ask me anything. But don't ask me my age or how much I make. Because they're both about the same.
So I don't have a question so much as I just finished your book.
Oh.
I started reading it just because it looked interesting, because we have it in our library.
Ooh.
And then I saw the announcement that you were going to be here. And I'm going, this is so cool. It made me, I don't have the same experiences that you do, but some similar ones.
Mm-hmm.
And I just felt like, yeah, I get that. Even though it's not the same level, but it's just like, so I appreciate you sharing your life with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have found that for people who have anxiety, that the book sort of calms them down a little or makes them feel seen. And for people who don't, they're like, oh my God, who has a Valium? Like, yes.
There's this contradiction because you have anxiety. At the same time, you have the courage to challenge that anxiety. Where does that come from? How do you get to that part of it?
Well,
Especially when you're so anxious.
that's a good question. It's hard to answer, but sort of easy to answer. And it's that the level of panic and anxiety I experienced was so traumatic and deep that it prevented me from existing, from having a life. And the only way that I could have a life was if I got better. And I had to learn how to get better. And I'm still learning how to get. This is some people find God when they're in their 20s. It's desperation, yeah. I wouldn't call it that, even though, yes, it's desperation. But it felt more like a, let's just do this. Like, this is terrifying, this is horrible, but like, do you want to like get what you want a little bit, or do you want to just continue to suffer for the rest of your life? And it was just unbearable. It's an unbearable. It's desperation, but it's also like it's just so unbearable. You have to find a way to feel better, and so I just every day is a next step. It's taken forever, and the truth is that I'm also, on medication. I take antidepressants, and that's helped me tremendously. And it helps you sort of rise above the absolute despair, and then you start learning all the things that no one taught you and that you need to know. So it's courage, but it's really about feeling better. So I don't feel like it's courage. I feel like I was just like what you do on the internet when you're sick and you go on Google and you're like, how do I make this cold that I've had for 6 days go away fast because I have a date on Saturday? Like, it was like that, but deeper. You seem unsatisfied with this answer.
Anxiety propelled.
Perhaps, but it was just like, when, I don't know if, think of an experience you've had where it's created dread, great dread. And that's your whole life, and you get tiny reprieves. And you're like, how can I live life in the reprieve? How can I get rid of this, right? And it's discomfort that compels you. It's the longing and the yearning to just be like everyone else. It's that. It's like everyone is there, and I'm here, and I want to be there. And I want to just stop feeling like this. It's just brutal, And so it's that, it's a longing. All right, you're more satisfied, okay. Check. Yes.
Hi. So I'm reading your novel and I'm loving it, your memoir, sorry.
It's okay,
And
forgive you.
you talk a lot about suffering in silence, especially as a kid and growing up in the 80s and 90s when mental health is not a thing that you talked about. But I have to imagine that your anxiety affected your siblings a lot, and there's scenes in the memoir where your sister is sort of mothering you in the taxi on the way to your father's. So what was sort of the effect on your siblings, and what did they think was sort of happening to you or what you were experiencing?
That's a great question. I don't know how much it affected them, quite honestly, because there was other mental illness from the top coming down. So I think that affected them, and it affected me. And I think my sister, my older sister, was so used to caring for my mom that it just, her other arm was for me, you know, always. But, you know, I've asked them, you know, how it impacted them, if at all, and my brother said it was just annoying, and because he didn't understand it. I think it really hurt my father. It felt like a rejection to him, and my mom just wanted to fix it. But my siblings, I think, were very wrapped up in other things to really be truly impacted in how it might have shaped their lives. But I'm going to tell them you asked. They're going to like that. Who else?
I just want to say thank you so much for your work and your wisdom.
Thank you.
I think I'm going to put on my refrigerator the line that you said, like, what was it? It was something like, avoiding what you are afraid of can trap you in a waiting room that becomes your life.
Yeah.
Like, that's like a refrigerator quote.
Put it up there. Take a
Right.
picture. Send it
so
to me.
thank you for your wisdom. And also, I'm curious what you're writing toward next. Like, what's your project and what's next for you?
I have two projects. I have a newsletter called How to Live, and I'm writing a book proposal to turn it into a book, and I'm sort of reconceptualizing it into its own thing. So I'm just going to pitch it to you and see how it sounds. All right. So, okay, picture this. So it's the newsletter is a mental health psychology newsletter. What I'm going to do is I'm going to ask 12 or 14 universal philosophical questions about existence, about being a human being. And I'm going to answer them through the lens of psychology. I don't know. Okay, not great. Okay, I'll work on it. It's fine. Don't worry about it. I'll get back to you. Let's talk in like a month. 2 months. Give me 2 months. And a novel, which I'm just not even going to tell you about. Exactly.
This is kind of a craft question.
Do it.
Is there a particular responsibility that fiction writers specifically have in the current moment to make a difference?
All right, I'm going to ask you a question. Don't go anywhere. Is there a particular responsibility that moral human beings have in this moment, no matter what they do, to make a difference?
Sure.
Okay.
However, as
Yes.
a writer
Yes.
of fiction,
Yeah?
how does that play out specifically?
Well, I think that it depends on who you are. You know, there are some writers who are like, well, that's not what I do. I don't know how to do that. You know, there are some writers who want to do it and are terrible at it. And there are some writers who do it in ways that you don't actually realize they're doing it. I don't think that it's anyone's responsibility to make a difference. I feel like if it was if people felt responsible to make a difference, it would be the most useless difference. Like you have to really want to, you have to have something you care about. You know, you can't be like an obligation. I don't know. I think that it's important that novelists who are well known weigh in. And whether it's in a novel or not, to me doesn't really matter. But I think it's important to have people weigh in. I don't want to read a bad novel just because someone was like, well, I have to make a difference, you know?
Right, no.
The difference could be that you just ruined my admiration for you.
Right.
But so I guess the answer is sort of like yes and no.
Thank you.
You're
Thanks for
welcome.
being here.
Thank you. Thanks for coming.
That makes me think of what our neighbor over at Calvin College, Gary Schmidt, who's won the Newbery a couple times, talks about how, like, you want the story to be about the actual story, you know? And sometimes when we write a story with, like, a moral or, like, a higher whatever in mind, it's sometimes, like, that's not always the story, right? But I'm thinking about this idea of truth.
Mm-hmm.
I can't shake this idea that you brought up about people like lying to you about how, like, when you went away to summer camp, that like nothing bad was going to happen.
Right.
And I'm wondering, like, that clearly wasn't true, right? Because bad things happen. But, like, what is your understanding of truth now as it relates to, like, what you tell those who read your writing?
Well, I think
How are you, like, doing something different, you know, than what you were told, if that makes sense?
I think it makes sense. I'm just going to interpret it how, and if I misinterpret it, you tell me. But I think that I've gone sort of the other way in that I'm, like, fiercely honest. And when friends come to me and they're like, my kid has anxiety and I don't know what to do, and I'm like, well, what did you tell them? And they're like, well, I told them that they're fine. And I was like, dude, no, you lied to them. They're like, no, they are fine. I'm like, they're not fine. They don't feel fine. And so I'm sort of, I'm like very much about do not lie to your kids. Tell your kids the truth, be honest with them. And I spend a lot of my time walking people through how to do that. And I take enormous pleasure in it because it's like I get to help a kid in a way that I wish someone had helped me. And if this is the way I get to do it, because I don't have kids, and there are a lot of reasons I don't have kids, but if this is the way that I get to sort of, you know, get what I needed, then I'm really grateful to be doing it. But, like, you know, I think that kids know. They just know. They absorb everything. They don't always know what they know, but they know when you're not being truthful with them. So yeah, so I'm like a little honest to a fault. I'm not mean, I hope. But I'm honest, you know, and so much so that I have, like, a lot of times I'm like, okay, I have to be diplomatic. What is diplomacy? What would that be like here? Like, I have to work on tact. Does that answer your question? Did I answer that question? Okay. Did you have another question? Hat man? No? Okay. Cap, sorry. Anyone else? One more. No?
Just for the sake of, you're an amazing storyteller, and I think probably everyone in the room wants to know this. And speaking of children, how many children have you named?
I love you. We're going on the road together. I have named 19 babies and not had one. Will you walk out on that? Come on, fellas. Yeah, 19 babies. I know, that has been like, I could feel the question from everyone throughout this whole, like, but how many babies have you named? Yeah, 19. Anyone pregnant? I'll help you. Seriously, I'll help you. Oh,
Kind of pulling off of that, have you kept in touch with Frankie?
yes.
You have you?
Oh my
Okay,
God, I
good.
love her so much. She's the best. She's 25. She's 25. For those of you who have not read the book, which is all of you, she's a child who was in my life, who I wanted to be my stepdaughter. Unfortunately, like not so much her dad. To be my husband, but I love this child, and so yeah, she's a tattoo artist. She's awesome, and her dad has a serious girlfriend, and I don't want to but she and I DM on Instagram because that's what the kids do. Thank you for asking about Frankie.
That's about all we have time for. Can we give one more round of applause, please?
I just want to thank you all so much for coming to hear a person you've never heard of from New York City in Michigan for the first time talk to you about panic and anxiety. Thank you. Thank you so much.